Good evening. Thank you for joining me tonight. This is the Church of the Lonely Heretics, and I am Jason Malott, author of a couple of books, Puppies and Napalm, The Extra-Dimensional Madness of the Prophets, and Adam is God, Eve is Us, Strange Stories About Aliens, Angels, and the Love of God from the Book of Genesis. I am here to answer your questions, talk to you about the Bible, and just general conversation. I call this the Church of the Lonely Heretic because one of the things that I have noticed in my life is that the older I get, the more that I learn about the Bible, about God, about Jesus, the more I always find myself on the outside of how most Christians think. It's not purposely. It's just, as you learn things, that's what happens. So I want to start out with, if you haven't had a chance to read Puppies and Napalm, it is full of a bunch of crazy stuff. It's very interesting. Make sure you pick it up if you haven't. It's a good read. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the Bible. One of the things that I've been really interested in lately, and hopefully this is what I get to talk a little bit about tonight, is how we got the Bible the way that it is. I mean, obviously you can go down to any Bible bookstore, even Walmart, wherever, you can buy yourself one. This one's old. I got this one a long time ago. It's been used a lot, and I've had it for years. But if you lived in the first century when Christianity first started, how would you have a copy of some of the things that are in here? If you weren't in the area where somebody was sending out letters or people had collected things, if you didn't have a lot of money where you could afford paper and, things to write on, I guess, in general, how did you have that? How did we get this thing the way that we have it? Now, a couple of things I want to point out right in the beginning is, before you make assumptions about how we got the Bible, look into it. Don't just believe something because I say it, anyone says it. Don't just believe them. How did we get the Bible? How did we get this thing? How do we have all these books all in one little place that we can sit down and read? Because, going to college and interacting with people, I've heard a lot of different things that, opinions that people have had. They're not really based on any actual scholarly work or anything. They're just exactly that, opinions. And the sad thing is, when you start researching some of it, it just falls through. And I've heard people say that, the Bible was written hundreds of years later. It wasn't written during the first century or anywhere near the beginning. It was something that was put together much later. Now, I don't believe that. And I want to start with this. One of the problems with reading this thing in English is some of the words don't carry over properly, like the word hell. I have a problem with hell. I actually wrote about it in this book right here. Wrote a whole chapter about it. I compared the Christian concept to hell like somebody who has some strange fixation with horror films from the 1980s. I will give you one example I think that's interesting is when you hear Christians talk about what they believe will happen to those who don't believe the way they believe, or went through the ritual that they did, or part of the tribe, or ideology that they hold to. They can get pretty eloquent on what's going to happen to you in hell. And what's interesting, there was a gospel that was written probably around the 2nd or 3rd century that was attributed to Peter, and full of silliness and ridiculousness, so that's why it wasn't included in the Bible. But he also wrote what the word is apocalypse, which is where we get the word Revelation. Now, the book of Revelations in our Bible is called Revelations, but really it's the apocalypse of John. Well, you also had the apocalypse of Peter. Now, if you look at old writings of the church fathers, they said that the apocalypse of Peter was not okay to read in church. Like, we're okay if y'all have this book, but don't read it in church. And the reason why is if you take just a few minutes to read it, it's full of just horrible, horrible things that is going to happen to you in hell. It's almost like what do you call it, like the cruel irony thing, like if you did this in life, then you're going to be punished in this way. And I don't want to get into details because it's graphic and disgusting, but the interesting thing about it was even like first century Christians were like, yeah, this is a little too intense. So, but what I wanted to point out is this is something that I would feel that really does show that this Bible was, I'm going to talk about the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke specifically. And these things were not written after, into the 2nd century, and some people say even to the 3rd century. Because there's a few different clues that you can jump on, and I'm going to start with this hell idea. Now, in your Bible, you're going to read the word hell in these 3 Gospels. The word that's used, the Greek word that's used, or it's kind of I say Greek word, it's actually not even Greek in origin, it's more Aramaic or Hebrew even in a sense, is the word Gehenna. And the thing is that Matthew, Mark, and Luke all use this word that it doesn't mean Hades, like the afterlife, the concept, the Greek concept of the place of the dead. This actually is a word that refers to a specific place that was common in the vernacular of the people of that time, that was right outside of Jerusalem. It was a dump. And all the people who weren't allowed in the city had to hang out there. So you had all the lepers, and they were weeping and gnashing their teeth. And you had all the unclean animals chewing on the leftover bones in the dump. So you had that, and you had fires always going to burn the trash. So when you read in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you read this word, and I'm looking something up while I'm talking to you. You read this word that's used, Gehenna. Well, for that word to even be utilized by somebody writing, if they were writing after 70 AD, it didn't exist anymore. Jerusalem was leveled. 70 AD. I mean, that's basic history. That's the whole, the historian Josephus, where he goes into the history of the Jews. It was because they were basically completely annihilated. When you read in the Matthew, Mark, and Luke about Jesus saying these, what's going to happen, this thing, this coming, people try to say it's like something going to happen in the last days, but really it was something that was happening at that time. And he's like, when you see all these things happen, run, get out of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was destroyed, and one of the things that Jesus prophesied was he said that not even one stone would be laid upon another. And when the Romans came through, they destroyed it so badly. They burnt down the temple, and all of the gold melted all over the bricks. So all these guys are grabbing bricks with gold on it and taking off. So the interesting thing about this is that when you look at a word in the Bible, it's Gehenna, which is the word hell. The only way that these people would have known to use this, or even having a value to the people they were writing it to, it would have had to have been written before Jerusalem was destroyed, and when this was still a saying that could have been used at the time that would have been understood by the people. Now, we understand it today because we take the concept and we try to tell it in a way that, makes sense traditionally, and we get the word hell. In a sense, it was a hell. It was a horrible place. It was not a place that, when Jesus told the Pharisees, you're hypocrites, you're a brood of vipers, how will you escape Gehenna? He was saying you belong in the dump. You belong to be burned in the dump with all the rest of the trash, because all this trash you're pushing on all these people that was full of legalism and fake religion, it belonged in the dump. And so this word that's used here for hell, Gehenna, would not have been used by Matthew, Mark, and Luke if they had been people that had written much later in time. And notice the book of John, which, most scholars believe was written probably closer to the end of the 1st century, does not use that word at all. And why? Well, because Jerusalem was destroyed. It didn't exist anymore. There was no need for that. One of the other things I've recently found out, and this is one example of how do we know that the books we have are reliable? How do we know that these guys wrote these books way back when? To start, I'm going to say that's ultimately you have in the language. You can check the language, check the culture, and say, okay, well, this checks out. Now, the second thing you can look at here. So you notice that the name Mary is used a ton of times. You'll have and Mary and the other Mary and this Mary and the mother of Jesus and Mary of Magdalene and Mary Lazarus' sister. And, you had all these Marys. And one of the more interesting things in archaeology that they found is that they go into Israel, they dig up these things called bone boxes. Now, when you have your tomb where you'd lay your family member, you'd lay him on the slab, they'd rot, you take the bones, you put them in a box, and you put the name of the person, So you have this big, long list of names of people that their bones are in this box. Interestingly enough, the most common name for a woman was Mary. Now, if these Gospels were not written during the time frame where Jerusalem and this, Judea was what it was, and these people that wrote them, lived in this culture in some way, or at least were the testimonies of the eyewitnesses or the people that were involved in it. If you were just some Greek guy living in, or Roman guy, speaks Greek, because Koine Greek was one of the main languages besides Latin. If you're you're over in Rome and you're like, I'm going to write this gospel, you wouldn't use the word Mary, because you wouldn't know Mary was that common of a name in their culture. So you take things like this and you go, well, this is, this is interesting. It's worth looking into. I got one other thing I wanted to read you that I thought was really interesting. And this is something that I've came across. I love reading old stuff. I don't even care. A lot of people don't like reading things that aren't in the Bible when they're Christian. That's, once again, I'm a heretic. I like reading all that weird stuff. And in a lot of ways, when I read it, I realize it's like, well, yeah, this thing doesn't belong in the Bible. The Apocalypse of Peter does not belong in the Bible. It's full of some crazy stuff. It's some sick people that had a beef with, all the people that were persecuting him. And it was kind of like their way of kind of lashing out against these people and giving, the members of their congregation hope that, hey, even though you're being persecuted so harshly, don't give up, because these people are going to be tormented themselves. And we see the testimony of the church fathers like, no, we shouldn't be reading this book. Not in church, no. So the books that we had that were, number one, a lot of people say, oh, well, they were put together hundreds of years later. Well, that's absolutely not true. We found, not even just the church fathers that said, okay, these are the books we're currently using. But, here's something that I think is interesting. It's there was an epistle that was written, and it's anonymous. I don't know who wrote it, but they know it was written somewhere between 100 and 130 BCE, like right at the beginning of the 2nd century. And it was the epistle, they call it the Epistle of Diagnotus. I'm going to probably horribly mispronounce his name. But what's interesting is when you read this epistle, you see a very complex and formed theology that's beyond just a small little sect or group of people that are just struggling to get by. But you see in like this period of time, like right right at the beginning of the 2nd century, you see a very advanced Christian idea. These were, ideas, and I just realized something. I think I might have turned off the comments because I'm realizing nobody's commenting, which is weird because normally we get comments. Let me turn the comments on. Sorry about that. There we go. All right. Yeah, I was letting my son do a live, and I was like, you better turn off those comments, boy. All right, so you have this epistle that was written, and you see where there's a very advanced form of Christianity, that there's specific ideas and doctrines, but not only that, the concept that the Christians were all over the place. And one of the things that, and I want to read you, and I'm actually going to read it out of the, let me grab this here, out of the Catholic Encyclopedia, is an English version of the epistle. And what I think is really interesting in this one, and it's going to probably take a few minutes because my computer's slow, but the whole idea that the Christians had spread out all over the world, they were everywhere. They weren't just in one little small place huddled together trying to, propagate a cult of some sort. But you had the idea that churches and groups of people that were gathering together, and they had shared beliefs and shared ideas, and the things that they believed was very universal. It wasn't just, small little pockets of people all believing completely different things. There were a lot of similarities, and one of the things, and this is something that you see, and I know a lot of people don't realize this, but like for instance, in the epistles of Paul, when you have Paul writing he was writing somewhere around probably 40, maybe just about less than 10 years after Jesus was walking the earth. And, he's writing letters to churches that, are full on, having these concepts, these doctrines, these ideas. And in 1 Corinthians 15, you see where Paul is displaying the gospel. He says, what I received. And it's exactly the same as what the gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as they started coming out after what Paul wrote, you see that the same ideas, the same concepts were there. And one of the things people have a problem with, and I do want to talk about this for a second, and I think my computer's finally bringing this epistle up so I can read you something out of it. But one of the other things I want to talk about is just the whole idea that oral tradition. And people say, oh, well, play the game of telephone. Look what happens. Well, but most of you could probably recite either poems or nursery rhymes that you've heard, or better yet, rap songs. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, Paul Revere, if somebody starts that, you can finish the whole thing word for word without there being any discrepancies in what you're saying. Even when referring to the wiffle ball bat, it's not, you could do that. Oral tradition could be passed down. And the thing is, though, is in that culture, oral tradition was not, it was we have books, and books are so common. Back then, books weren't that common. You had to be rich, you had to be wealthy, or you had to be in the area where the people were writing these things. And so something I want to point out here, this is in the Epistle of Diagnosis. Like I said, this is from about the beginning of 2nd century. And in chapter 5, it says, the manner of the Christians. Now, understand, this is a Greek guy, probably writing to other Greeks, and he's writing about this whole Christian idea. And he says, for the Christians are distinguished from other men, neither by country nor by language, nor the customs which they observe. For they neither inhabit cities of their own, nor they employ a particular form of speech, nor lead a life which is marked out by any singularity. The course of conduct which they follow has not been devised by any speculation or deliberation of inquisitive men, nor do they, like some, proclaim themselves the advocate of any merely human doctrines. Now, I want you to understand this. What it's saying here is Christians weren't nationalists back then. Christians didn't gather together under a political party and, the whole idea of a Christian nation. It was the Christian nation is the kingdom of God. It's not in a border or boundaries. It's not a specific land that you were born in, so you like it a lot, and so you think it's the most special of all. No. What this guy was saying in the 2nd century, they didn't hold to that. It wasn't just about the country they lived in. They weren't recognized as, a Christian nation. All right. I had to take a little side note there to point that out. But inhabiting Greeks as well as barbarian cities, according as to the lot of each of them has been determined, and following the custom of the natives in respect to clothing, food, and the rest of their ordinary conduct, they display to us their wonderful and confessedly striking method of life. They dwell in their own countries, but simply as sojourners. As citizens, they share in all things with others, yet endure all things as if foreigners. I want you to hear that for a second. Think about that. They endure all things as if they were foreigners. That sounds very similar to Hebrews chapter 11. But I'm not going to go there for now. But let's talk about this here. Okay. So, they marry, as do others. They begot children. They do not destroy their offspring. They have a common table, but not a common bed. They are in the flesh, but they do not live according to the flesh. They pass their days on earth, but they are citizens of heaven. They obey the prescribed laws and at the same time surpass the laws with their lives. They love all men. Now, listen to this for a second. Christians were known by something that Jesus in John 13 said, you'll be known by your love, not your hate, not your trying to separate from other people or try to prove that you're somehow, better than other people because, I don't know, your life is different in some way, shape, or, you know what? The original church was about acceptance, and we're not here to judge every single other person's life, because I'll tell you what, when the light gets shined on you, the story changes pretty quickly. I love how the grace of God is so big until it applies to somebody you don't like, and then there is no grace. And then it's all about hell and damnation. It's all about how, this guy's evil and this is wrong and the church needs to stand up against this or that. The church needs to stand up for love. So, let me keep reading this because I think this is really interesting. Once again, this is the epistle of Diognetus. I'm probably saying his name wrong. Wrote it around the 2nd century. This is describing Christians. Now, this is the beginning of the 2nd century. So, like I said, between 100 to 138 BC. And so this is not like 300 or 400, we're talking, this is right here in the beginning of the church. And so, let me keep reading here. They obey the prescribed laws, but at the same time surpass the laws with their lives. They love all men and are persecuted by all. They are unknown and condemned. They are put to death and restored to life. They are poor, yet make many rich. They are in lack of all things, yet abound in all. They are dishonored, yet in their very dishonor are glorified. They are evil spoken of, and yet are justified. They are reviled, yet they bless. How often, Christian, and listen to me for a second, and I know I'm just a heretic, so you can ignore me and just think that anything I'm saying is just whatever, crazy. But how do people know you? I mean, seriously, if somebody was to describe you, do you bless when you're reviled, or do you revile back? Really, think about that. Do you bless those that curse you, as Jesus said? They are dishonored, yet glorified. They are evil spoken of, yet they are justified. They are reviled, and yet they bless. They are insulted, and repay the insult with honor. How many times have I seen Christians, for some strange reason, and I'm just going to say this right here, God doesn't need you to defend him or her. However you want to refer to God, you don't need to defend God. God needs no defense. Because God's going to be quite all right without whatever silly words that you try to come up with and your materialistic ideas of trying to defend God. God don't need your defense. And you can try to quote the scriptures at me, and I'm just going to tell you, you're misunderstanding. You're always ready to give an answer. An answer to what? For the hope that's within you. Why do you believe this stuff? Is it just because some book told you so, or some pastor stood up and, I don't know, you watched a YouTube video and the dude was like totally charismatic and you're like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Did somebody manipulate you? Did they play some music and tell you you're going to hell and come up to the front, so you can be saved? Is that your faith? Always be prepared to give an answer. I will address this because God does not need your defense. People need to hear why you believe. And if you're just going to give a bunch of silly, empty words without the love, without the life, without actually something behind it, then you really need to question what you believe. So I said, this is the Church of the Lonely Heretics, because when you start actually believing this stuff and you start really digging in and being honest and being real, you find yourself on the outside pretty quick. Where I started finding myself on the outside is I started believing that I believe that God's going to find a way to save everyone, no matter what. I'm not a universalist. I think the definition's silly because actually the word Catholic used in Latin referring to the church is universal church, but I don't want to go there. I believe that God's going to do it his way, and that's up to him. That's not up to me. And when I try to work it out in my three-dimensional mind, in my materialistic concepts, I can't figure it out because God is above all of this. And if you don't believe that God is above all this, you believe God is just, I don't know, fits in your tiny little box just so perfectly. If that's the God you want to serve, you're serving an idol. Idols fit in boxes. You can fit idols in boxes. You can't fit God in a box. Nope, you cannot. So, he doesn't need you to defend him. He needs you to give people an answer and why. Why do you believe this stuff? What changed your life? What made you think differently? And what happened to me was when I was younger, a lot younger, I'm an old man now. When I was 18, I didn't really believe in God. I, consider myself an agnostic or an atheist in some sense. My wife was pregnant with our first son, and she went to the hospital to have a miscarriage. And at that point in my life, I realized that there was nothing I could do to stop what was happening. I was hopeless. And something inside of me, I don't know why, I don't know what. All I know is that something kept saying, if you ask Jesus to help you, he can help you. And so what did I do? I said, Jesus, save my baby. That was it. I went back into the hospital room. Doctor was kind of crazy-eyed, looked over at me. We found a heartbeat. Everything's all right. And see, that's what changed my life. Now, I started reading the Bible because I wanted to learn about Jesus. But I didn't read the whole Bible. I was like, I want to read the red letters because I just want to read the stuff Jesus said. I was silly. I didn't really understand the whole concept. It took me a few years to figure it out. But God doesn't need your defense. God needs you to give an answer for the reason why you believe what you believe. And if you can't, if it's all based upon words, the Bible says this. The Bible says a lot of things. And we can trust it. I'm not saying it's untrustworthy. I'm saying if your faith is just based upon a bunch of words that somebody wrote a few thousand years ago, it ain't going to stand. Because somebody's going to come along that has more words. Here's a good example. I went to Liberty University. I graduated there and would be considered a heretic by them, obviously. Once again, the name of my life tonight is Church of the Lonely Heretics. And when I was going there, they would use some material of a man named, I think it was Bart Ehrman. And it was funny when I started listening to videos from this guy, I realized I'm like, well, he's extremely smart, but his conclusions are weird because he doesn't come to the same conclusions that most people do. And I don't have really a problem with him. I just think it's interesting because most of his faith is based upon just words. And if somebody finds the right words to convince you otherwise, then, well, you're going to believe that. But if your faith is based on something deeper, something more, then you're ready to give an answer. Okay, let's go back. The Epistle of Diagnosis, what I was telling, we've been reading here, Diagnosis. I can't even say his name right, probably, but that's okay. Nobody can because nobody's really speaking that language anymore. He's writing this epistle and he's talking about the Christians. And like I said, when they were reviled, they blessed. They didn't curse people, they blessed people. And Christians claiming that their God is the only true God is what I can't buy into. Okay, I can respect that. I'm not going to convince you otherwise if that's what you were looking for, because, ultimately, statements like that, you've made your decision. I think it's a lot bigger than that. I don't think it's something as simple as making a statement like, well, Christians think that they have the only way and everybody else is wrong. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that Christians had it all right because, like I said, the name of this podcast, or the name, normally I do a podcast, the name of this live is Church of the Lonely Heretics. Because when you start actually believing some of this stuff, you do find yourself on the outside. I believe God will find a way to save everyone, and how he does that is his business, not mine. Can God use other people's culture, other people's language, other people's traditions, other people's beliefs, other people? Absolutely. It's up to God. When the thief hung on the cross next to Jesus, he looked over at Jesus and said, hey, remember me when you enter your kingdom. There was no baptism. There was no sinner's prayer. He didn't go to church. He didn't take his vitamins. He didn't pledge allegiance to a flag. He literally just said, Jesus, remember me. And that was it. It was that simple. It was that easy. So, going back to your comment, I don't even know if you're even still on here. Sorry, I just now started getting the comments coming across. So if you've left, I apologize. Who is it? Vance. So, yeah. But before you dismiss Christianity altogether, you've got to consider something. Number one, Jesus was the most unique person that's ever existed. And if you have a problem with that, then, tell me that we stopped celebrating Christmas. Tell me that we changed the way that we tell time. Jesus is definitely a very, very influential, and even skeptics, even non-believers will tell you that Jesus had a huge impact on our world. The New Testament is very unique. It's very interesting how God preserved certain things and didn't preserve other things. I believe that the inspiration is based upon what I would call the divine providence of God. I think that God wants us to have what we need to have. And God will meet us where we're at. And even if we don't have everything and we don't know everything, it's fine. God will take care of the rest. I think our job is not as Christians to tell everyone that they're wrong and they're going to hell. I think like what we're reading in this letter, this is an epistle from the 2nd century, the epistle of Diognetus, and I'm going to mess up his name again, but who cares? You see that Christians were known by their love. You know, I always use it like, this is a good example. Vance, nobody needs to convince you to jump on a trampoline. But I can guarantee you need some convincing to build a brick wall. You know, doctrine, theology, it's bricks. You're building bricks. You're just stacking up a brick wall that you can separate yourself from other people. And you basically say, I am on this side of the wall, you're on that side of the wall. Whereas a trampoline, interestingly enough, will still work without all the springs. I know that because I had a trampoline and it fell apart. And it still worked fine without all the springs. So let's go back to this epistle. It says that they were reviled, but they blessed. They were insulted, but they repaid the insult with honor. This is talking about the Christians, 2nd century in this epistle. They do good, yet are punished as evildoers. And when punished, they rejoice as if quickened into life. They are assailed by the Jews as foreigners and are persecuted by the Greeks. Yet those who hate them are unable to assign any reason for their hatred. The sad thing about today, can we say that today? No. This is what's sad, is that today, people can find reasons. They can say, well, look at how much hate is coming out of this church, out of this person, out of this idea, out of this belief. Look at how much hate. And Vance, I think, what would you just say? I think my Jewish friends and Muslim was wrong. Well, I have an issue with religion in general. Any religion that subjugates women and puts women in a lower place, I think is wrong. I don't care what religion you are. Even if you're a Christian and you think that women are less than men, then I don't know what Bible you're reading. It's interesting that God made sure the book of Philemon made it into the New Testament. And a lot of people don't read that book. It's literally like one page in your Bible. But it was Paul's stance against slavery long before Abraham Lincoln showed up. Paul was talking about it. And the sad thing is that even though people could have words of truth or words of wisdom or words of direction, they could still take it and manipulate it for their own, purposes, their own reason, and hurt people. And if what you're doing is hurting other people, I don't care what religion you are, you're wrong. If what you're doing is subjugating other people, if what you're doing is if you're racist, if you think your group of people are better than another group of people, that you're special or you're somehow, no, I don't agree with that. I would say you're wrong. I don't care what religion you are. But we see here, and this was chapter 5 in the Epistle of Diognetus, you can look it up yourself, the Christians were not looked at the way that Christians are looked at today. That's what I want you to understand. The other thing is that Christians were everywhere. So like I said, the Bible wasn't written like 300 or 400 AD by a group of people that wanted to make Constantine happy. No. It was already formed. There was already doctrine. There was already theology. There were already ideas. People were already... And any time that we have these discussions about this very old book, we got to realize that we're jumping into the middle of a discussion that's been going on for a long time. The New Testament, 2,000 years. People have been discussing this thing. And don't think you're going to come up with something new today. Because I don't. I'm not that stupid. The things that I'm thinking, even guys like Origen, Martin Luther, not always the greatest of men, but they still thought these same things. And they suffered just like anyone else. But the ideas and things that we talk about today, they're not new. And if you think they're new, I got news for you, wrong. People have been discussing this stuff for years and trying to figure it out and trying to work it out. What I want to point out as a member of the Church of the Lonely Heretic is that the church was very different in the beginning. It wasn't like it is today. We see that there was a fully formed concept and idea of Christianity back then, but like I said it when I began reading this out of chapter 5, they weren't known by their country or by their language, by their customs they observed. It wasn't by their traditions. I want you to hear that. I don't have a problem with liturgy. If you like it, that's great. That's wonderful. Say your prayers, bow your 5 times, have some guy stick a piece of bread on your mouth, whatever. But at the end of the day, if that's all you have, you're missing the point. You're missing it. And I think sometimes the tradition comes between us actually having a true relationship with God. Because that relationship is much deeper than what your traditions believe. And you know what? Traditions can change. I remember when I was going to Liberty University in my last year, I in my theology class, I wrote a paper basically showing that God can tell people things, but people can't always understand them. So what happens? The church changes its mind. He was very upset by that. Interestingly enough, a professor that was... he was the head of the theological divinity school, all that kind of stuff. He challenged me to debate, which I thought was funny. Here's a student writing you a paper, and it made you so upset you want to openly debate me about it, which tells me that I already won. Because if I got in your head, then obviously it was something you felt you needed to defend. And what I was saying was, all through history, we've changed our mind. We've changed our mind about a lot of things. A lot of things, because we didn't really understand fully what God was saying. And, the thing is, when you're on the side that I'm on, which I consider I'm on the outside, I'd love to be part of a group of people who believe the same way I do, but I can't go back. I can't believe the hate mongering. I can't believe a church that believes that God burns his children in a basement somewhere. I can't. It's very difficult for me to fellowship with people that think that way. It actually bothers me because there are less than 20 verses in the whole New Testament that people can even take the words and make them say hell. I told you about Gehenna earlier. I told you about that. But I just can't believe a group of people that are going to take a small portion of Scripture and make that the most important thing they believe. When you have scriptures that talk about love, about faith, about Jesus, 200, 300, 400 times mentioned, but the ones that people want to focus on are the ones that there's 1 or 2, 3. Faith without works alone is not enough to enter the kingdom of heaven. Ooh, you're quoting some Apocrypha there. I like that. I would say that was referencing James, who in the beginning, James was not a book that was readily accepted in the church, because James said some really, really contentious things, which the church today need to hear. So Ultra Lincoln, hear this for a second. So James, talking about the rich people, he said, hey, rich, weep and howl because of the coming judgment. Because, when the poor people come in, you make them sit in the bad seats. But when the rich people come in, you give them a nice chair. Sit here. How is that very similar to the way the church is today? That we look upon the rich and give them preferential treatment. And James said, the Lord of hosts is coming for you. That's some strong words. He said, your faith without works is dead. And see, this is what we're talking about. I want you to understand that this is what we're talking about today. If your faith is based upon a tradition, even if you're saying, well, I believe the Bible. I believe the Bible too, but my faith isn't just on this book. Because guess what? This book all through time has been interpreted, has been people have taken it into their cultures and tried to make sense out of it based upon the culture they're in. But it doesn't mean that my faith stands or falls based upon what my American interpretation of the Bible says. No, my faith is deeper than that. And yes, this is what the Epistle of Diagnostic was talking about. He was talking about Christians of his time were known by their love. When they were reviled, they blessed. Can we say the same today? Like I said, I'm on the outside, so I have no problem saying this very loud and clear, because you've joined the Church of the Lonely Heretic. And I wrote some books too, if you want to read some of my craziness. Puppies and Napalm, The Extra-Dimensional Madness of the Prophet. That's my second one. I'm writing one again right now, but this is my first one. Adam is God, Eve is us. Strange stories about aliens, angels, and the love of God from the book of Genesis. So listen up. What James was saying to his people. James was the head of the Jerusalem church as long as it existed. A lot of people think that somehow it tied into the whole Essenes and Qumran, all that kind of stuff, but I don't want to go there. But the point is that James understood that just having faith, saying that you believe in something, is not enough. Now, what do I mean by not enough? It's not real. I'm not talking about heaven and hell. Throw that stuff out of your mind. Get the whole heaven and hell, get that out. Just throw it away right now. I'm serious. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is here right now. Now, are you saying, well, there's no afterlife? I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is Jesus didn't focus on the afterlife as much as people try to say he did. He focused on how you treat people here and now. And guess who James was? The brother or half-brother, whatever you want to say, of Jesus. So who better would have known what Jesus had to say and the life he lived? James saw it. And he said, you believe in God? Good job. Even the demons believe that. So just saying that you have faith in something, does that really mean anything? I don't care what religion you are. How much he charges for these books? They're very cheap, actually. I don't know. My publisher put them on Amazon. I think they went down to like $9 or something. Don't worry, I'm not making millions on that. I like writing books because I like getting the things I think out there. And the way to do it is through a publisher, so it's fun. So somebody asked a question here. Let's see. Thank you, Lucas. God bless me. I appreciate that. Hopefully I finished. Oh, yeah. So Epistle of Diognos, written around the beginning of the 2nd century, made it very clear that the Christians of his time were known by their love. We're not known by a nation or a custom or a language. They were known by their love. Think about that. All right. What is more powerful, good or evil? I don't see the world like a Star Wars concept. I don't see the Sith and the Jedi. I don't believe in the whole dualistic ideas. I don't think that it works that way. Do you want me to answer that good is more powerful? See, good is more powerful in the sense that if you are doing well, if you're doing the things you should do. What I mean by that is love. Love, even if other people hate you for it, love makes sure that you don't change because of that hate. You see, you can't, and I took off my glasses because I'm getting serious here. Hating people and holding unforgiveness for the evil that you've experienced is like drinking rat poison trying to kill a rat. You see, you have the power over yourself. That's it. If somebody does evil to you, you can choose to forgive them and to love instead of hate. You can choose that. Not because the person deserves it. See, that's where people are messed up. God never told you to forgive people because they deserve it. Because guess what? God didn't forgive you because you deserve it. God did not die on a cross because you deserve it. He did it because he loved you, and he wants you to do the same. So, what is more powerful? Well, good is more powerful if you choose to do good, even when people are evil. But in this world, sad to say, I'm finding that evil is becoming worse. And it's because Christians aren't doing anything about it. We're choosing to take part in this evil, this hate, this divisive hate, this demonic, divisive, disgusting hate, where we try to separate ourselves from people. We become tribal. We try to say, I'm better than this person because, I think, gay people shouldn't be married, or I think abortion is wrong. So I'm better than these people because, I do this or do that or whatever. I say my prayers. I eat my vitamins. I pledge allegiance. I don't wear a mask when people tell me to. You know what? All of that is silliness. The Christians of the 2nd century, and this is what I was talking about in reading this epistle, those Christians were not known by their not complying to the government. No, it says that they obey the laws because that wasn't what was important, because the kingdom is not of this world. They were heavenly minded. They didn't look at things that way. They saw that the kingdom of God was much bigger, and God is not a materialistic God. You can't sit here and try to, it's all about this. No, it's not. It's bigger. Jesus gave himself up to die when he had the power to call a legion of angels to come down and take over the Roman Empire. He could have. He could have. So, if you want to know my absolute answer, it's good. But I don't look at the world in dualism because I don't believe that God is subject to that concept because I'm not a materialist. All right. Let me get to some more of these questions real quick before I finish. Why was God taking out of the Pledge of Allegiance when that's needed for guidance? Like I said, I don't. Whatever nation wants to say whatever they want to say, that's up to them. I'm not for nations. I think that God is much bigger. And like I said, in this epistle, the epistle of diagnosis, we don't even know who wrote it. That's just the title of it. He said in chapter 5, the Christians are not distinguished from other men, neither by country, nor by language, by custom, they observe. They inhabit cities, but it doesn't mean anything to them. You know, they inhabit Greek, barbarian cities. They're all over the place. But it says that they're known because when they're reviled, they bless. When they're cursed, they pray, they love. They're known by their love. That's what I want you to hear. Jesus didn't die. He took a long nap over a 3-day weekend. That's funny. Yeah. I don't know if you really wanted me to answer that. The evil's coming from inside y'all's house. Okay. All right. Yeah. I believe that. Was it Daddy? Okay. Hey, Daddy. Yeah. I see a lot of evil that comes from Christianity. That's why this is called the Church of the Lonely Heretic. I'm on the outside. I don't believe the way a lot of those guys believe. And because of that, I found myself on the other side. I don't believe that God gives up on anyone. I don't believe that God tortures his children in a basement. I believe that God will find a way to save everyone. His love is big enough. His home is big enough. He says that in my Father's house, there are many rooms. When we sit down for the banquet at the end of times, there's going to be a lot of people that you didn't expect to be sitting next to you. I think that God's grace is bigger than we can even imagine. But that's between God and other people. I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for you. They didn't obey the laws, and they didn't pay the Roman taxes for Jews. I don't know what you're talking about there. You might, Daddy, you got to go read some things first. God's been taken out of the pledge. Okay, yeah. Is preaching on TikTok tax-free? Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't get any money for this. As you can see, I got 269 likes. You think I'm making any money off this thing? Do you believe that I, as an atheist, will be punished in hell? Dude, okay, Daddy, you got to back up. You got to listen to this whole thing before you make those comments, man. I think I said from the very beginning, I said, I don't believe in that. That's why it's called the Church of the Lonely Heretic. I'm on my own here, man. I'm telling you, I don't believe in that stuff. I don't believe that God tortures children in a basement. He says that if you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father give good to them who ask? I mean, I'm right there. It tells me that God is a lot nicer than me, and there is no way I would torture my kid in a basement. So no, I don't believe that. But I will tell you this. I myself was on that side at one time, and it wasn't a church. It wasn't some guy preaching on TikTok that got my attention. It wasn't reading a Bible or saying a prayer. It's like anything. I mean, you have to experience it. And when you do, it changes your life forever. And I can tell you, no matter what you believe now, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to believe that in 20 years. Because God has a way to wait and to find the perfect time to talk to you. And why do so many Christians believe that? That's what I'm talking about. And guess what, dude? I wrote a book about it. Puppies and Napalm, The Extra-Dimensional Madness of the Prophets. And Adam is God, Eve is us. Strange stories about aliens, angels, and the love of God from the book of Genesis. This one, chapter 5, I talk about the idolatry of Christianity. And in this one, and it's chapter... Let me see, where is it at? Which one is it? Oh, Hellbound. Yeah, it's chapter 3. Hellbound with Pinhead and Jeremy the Prophet. I wrote a whole chapter about it. I give all the scriptures that prove otherwise. I talk about that there's only less than 20 words in the entire New Testament that use the word hell in English that we use. Most of those words is Gehenna, where I started this whole talk earlier, where I talked about the word Gehenna was a place right outside of Jerusalem. It's like a dump. They burn things all the time. So yeah, Jesus said that the Pharisees, they belonged in the dump because they were teaching a false and empty religion. So yeah. Why Christians believe it? Because you can control people with that. You can force people to come to your church. You can force people to give money so that your church keeps going. You can make people feel guilty and guilt them into doing things. It's wrong. It's evil. Jesus never did that. Jesus didn't do that kind of stuff. So yeah, I absolutely 100% don't understand why Christians believe that. Because if I was torturing my kid in a basement, you would not only call the police, you would think I was a horrible dad. And if God does the same thing, I mean, I'm sorry. If you believe that, you're believing in a devil, not a God. And that's what I talk about. I talk about in this chapter, I talk about how a lot of these examples that Christians give, they come right out of 1980s horror films. Like, it's like watching, a movie that was really popular when I was young, the Taboo movie. It was Hellraiser, and Pinhead, and it's this whole Christian idea. It sounded to me as, as a younger teenager, when I hear these Christians preaching this stuff, it sounded to me like, it's like, dude, did you just watch a scary movie? It's like, it's not in the Bible. And actually, it was something I mentioned in the very beginning. There were a lot of books that weren't included in the Bible. And people say, oh, well, why'd they leave them out? Well, why don't you read the Apocalypse of Peter and read about all the horrible things that God does to people in hell? Why do you think that was left out? Well, it was disgusting. And even the people of the first, second century, the church fathers, they were like, yeah, don't read that in church. That's gross. So, yeah. Origen believed the same way I did. He was one of the founding church fathers. Martin Luther, the guy who started the Protestant Reformation, he said, who am I to say that God can't save people after death? I mean, you don't have to believe that stuff. You don't. And yeah, I say I'm on the outside, but to tell you the truth, what I'm saying is not unbiblical. I'm saying what the Bible says. And that's why I wrote the books I wrote. Because I believe that God will find a way to save everyone. And no, I believe that I don't believe in hell the way that they believe in it. I don't believe in that at all. Why would God want to torture people? Guess what? Jesus was tortured. That was the one person that needed to be tortured. Nobody else does. And whether you like that or not, it's fine with me. You'll find out one day. So, I want to finish up with this and get right to the point. We talked about we can trust the New Testament. We can trust it. Why? Because the words that were used, I gave you the example of Gehenna, hell. It's a word that could only be used by people that lived in Jerusalem prior to 70 AD when it was destroyed. Everyone knows Jerusalem was destroyed. Josephus tells the whole story. So Gehenna didn't exist after 70 AD. And that's why John, who wrote his gospel much later, doesn't mention the word hell. There's only, like I said, less than 20 verses in the entire New Testament that mention hell. And so I would rather focus on the 300 that mention love, the 500 that mention Jesus. I think there's a lot more interesting things. Just mathematically speaking, it makes no sense to believe in a few scriptures and say that that's the whole message of God. It's not. The other words are like Hades, which, it's Greek. It's, there's tons of information about Hades. It's an idea of death. It's not, the Christians adopted that concept to say that Jesus defeated Hades. Jesus defeated death. He rose from the dead. It means something. It's not just a word to be thrown around to scare your friends into believing and going to your church. There was more to it. So I talked about the importance of knowing that you can trust the New Testament because, like I said, that I gave you the example of the bone boxes where we find Mary's mentioned a ton of times. And of course, Mary's mentioned a ton of times in the Bible. Why would a guy from Rome 200 years later know that Mary was the most popular name in Judea when Judea was completely destroyed by 200? So, of course, that's ridiculous. And then I found an epistle written in the 2nd century, the Epistle of Diognetus. And I read you from chapter 5, just talking a little bit about how Christians, not only were they a very well-known group of people all around the world, they had ideas, doctrines. There was already a full, belief system that was going. But the way he described Christians from his time was very different than the way Christians are today. He said that they were known, just as Jesus said in John 13, by their love. When people reviled them and hated on them, persecuted them, they loved back. They didn't. They were poor, but they made many people rich. They were dishonored, yet the very dishonored, they were glorified. They were evil spoken of, but they were justified. When they were reviled, they blessed. When they were insulted, they honored and did good. They were punished as evildoers, yet they did good to others. And the most important is that they love all men, yet persecuted by all. So, I want you to hear me out on this. Are you a Christian that's known by your love? Or are you a Christian that's known by your hate, your separation, the way you can scream at people and hit them over the head with a Bible? Because at the end of the time, when everything's said and done, really, what really matters is this. Did you really demonstrate the love that Jesus has? Or did you just preach some religion you believe? So, thank you for tuning in to the Church of the Lonely Heretic. That's me. I got a couple books if you want to learn more about my craziness. I sent this book to one of my really close friends that I grew up with in church and told him to tell me how he felt about it. He stopped talking to me. Yeah, well, it's just a guy. I know. He runs a church, so this is a little too scary. Believing that God's going to save everyone can kind of get you in trouble. And my other book, Puppies and Napalm, The Extra-Dimensional Madness of the Prophets. I think you get both these on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Target, wherever you want to go. Go check them out. Tune in next time when you get to listen to a heretic rant about craziness. Because in the end, I'm going to say this. No matter what you believe, God's going to find a way to get to you. You might not believe it now, but 20 years from now, you're going to go, wait a second, that weird dude on TikTok said that one day God would get over to me. He will. God will find a way because he loves you more than anything you can ever imagine. So don't give up. God's going to find a way. I'll talk to you guys later, and I'm shutting this off.